When people think of Romper Room, they remember smiling teachers, cheerful songs, and the magical mirror that seemed to speak directly to every child watching at home. But behind that gentle image was a world that few people ever saw. The show wasn't just about learning or fun. According to people who worked on it, Romper Room was also a massive business built around selling products to families. Children on the show were not actors, but they were still part of the marketing system. Unpaid advertisers for toys and snacks shown during the program. The hosts had secret hand signals for when kids cried or refused to follow directions. And every city that aired the show often had its own version, sometimes without strict safety rules. The magic mirror, which millions of children believed could see them, eventually became a carefully staged illusion. As the truth came out, people began to see Romper Room differently. What seemed like an innocent classroom on TV turned out to be one of television's first experiments in combining education and profit. And it didn't always go as planned. It all began in 1953, when a woman named Nancy Klaster from Baltimore had an idea that would change children's television forever. Nancy wasn't a psychologist or a producer. She was simply someone who loved children and believed there had to be a better way to teach them. One day, while watching a group of kindergarteners struggle to focus, she thought, what if learning could feel more like play? Together with her husband Bert, she created Romper Room, a show where real children, not trained actors, would appear on live television and learn together in a classroom setting. It was a brave idea for the 1950s, a time when most TV programs were scripted and polished. Nancy believed that children loved watching other children, and she was right. Her idea exploded in popularity. Soon, Romper Room was being broadcast in dozens of countries from the United States to Japan, Brazil, and the United Kingdom. But Nancy's dream wasn't just about fun. It was a carefully built business model. She trained every local host herself and required all of them to be certified teachers. The show became a franchise, and every station had to follow her exact script, buy the official merchandise, and use her strict system of behavior and learning. Within 20 years, Nancy and Bert had turned Romper Room into $1 million empire. The heart of Romper Room was its classroom. Each local version featured a group of preschool-aged children sitting around a cheerful host, who was often called Miss Nancy, Miss Sally, or Miss Fran. These women followed exact scripts that Nancy had written. They greeted the children, led songs, played games, and taught lessons about manners using characters like Mr. Doobie and Mr. Don't Be. Mr. Doobie encouraged good behavior, while Mr. Don't Be showed what not to do, a clever, simple way to teach moral lessons. It might sound ordinary today, but in the 1950s, that was groundbreaking. At that time, discipline was often based on punishment, not positive examples. Nancy's approach used kindness, structure, and repetition. The show became a live experiment in child psychology, even though Nancy herself had no formal training in the field. Soon, researchers began studying her methods, and her Doobie system became famous. Yet behind the cameras, the atmosphere was not always calm. Live TV with real 4 and 5 roles was unpredictable. Some kids cried, others froze in front of the lights, and some simply wandered away from the set. Producers and hosts had to stay calm no matter what happened. Every few months, the cast of children was replaced with new ones, which meant endless chaos and constant retraining. The more popular Romper Room became, the greater the pressure on everyone involved. By the late 1950s, the waiting list for children who wanted to appear on the show stretched for years. Parents would register their children before they were even born. Critics joked that by the time some kids were chosen, they'd be adults. But there was truth behind the joke. In some cities, the waiting time really was several years long. The selection process was surprisingly strict. Before being accepted, children were tested to see if they could handle the bright studio lights, loud noises, and separation from their parents. Many were turned away for being too shy, too hyperactive, or too emotional. The show wanted calm, camera-friendly children who could follow instructions. Even becoming a host was incredibly competitive. For example, Miss Fran, one of the most famous hosts, was chosen from more than 800 applicants. Candidates had to pretend to teach an imaginary classroom and pass personality tests that measured warmth and patience. Once chosen, they flew to Baltimore for 2 weeks of training with Nancy herself, where every gesture and word had to match her rules. The result was a show that looked calm and spontaneous, but was actually one of the most tightly controlled productions on TV. One of the most magical moments in Romper Room came at the end of each episode, when the host picked up the famous magic mirror and said the rhyme, romper, bumper, stomper, boo, tell me, do magic mirror, tell me, today. Did all my friends have fun at play? Then she would begin to name children. I see Tommy, and Sarah, and Michael. Millions of kids at home believed that the host could really see them through the TV. Parents mailed letters from across the country, hoping their child's name would be read aloud. What most people didn't know was that hosts spent hours reading hundreds of letters and memorizing as many names as possible. Forgetting a name meant disappointing a child somewhere out there who had been waiting for that moment. Over time, this simple gesture became one of the most emotionally powerful parts of the show, and also one of the most stressful for the hosts. For many families, that moment made Romper Room feel personal and real, as if the show truly cared about every child watching. But later, when pre-recorded versions replaced live shows, children began to notice that the hosts no longer said real names. The magic faded, and for many fans, it was the beginning of the end. In 1962, Romper Room was involved in a story that shook the nation. A local host from Phoenix, known to viewers as Miss Sherry, was suddenly at the center of a national controversy. While pregnant with her 5th child, she discovered that she had taken a drug called thalidomide, which was causing terrible birth defects in babies across Europe. When doctors confirmed that her baby would not survive, she faced an impossible choice. At the time, abortion was illegal in most of the United States, even for medical reasons. Miss Sherry spoke to a newspaper anonymously to warn other women, but within days her name and address were published. The reaction was brutal. Reporters surrounded her home, protesters shouted outside, and her TV station fired her immediately, claiming she was no longer fit to appear on a children's show. She had been one of Romper Room's most beloved hosts, and now she was publicly humiliated. The FBI had to protect her family from death threats. Eventually, she traveled to Sweden to end the pregnancy under medical supervision. Her story appeared on the front pages of newspapers around the world. It forced America to confront painful questions about women's rights, medicine, and morality. Years later, HBO made a movie about her called A Private Matter. The scandal deeply affected Romper Room's reputation, and for the first time, the cheerful image of the show began to crack. Nearly 2 decades later, another surprising story came out, this time about a little boy who would grow up to be one of the most famous actors in the world. In 1979, 5-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio appeared on the Los Angeles version of Romper Room. It was his favorite show, and his mother got him a spot as a special treat. But once filming began, young Leo couldn't sit still. He ran up to the cameras, made faces, and even smacked one of the lenses. He shouted over the host and tried to pull his mother onto the set. According to Leo, the crew eventually fired him for being too wild. The story became a funny part of his early life, a little piece of Hollywood legend. But years later, the host of that episode explained that children were never actually fired from Romper Room. If a child became too energetic, they were simply moved out of camera view until they calmed down. Whether Leo exaggerated or not, his story revealed just how challenging it was to work with real children on live TV. The show's crew had special hand signals to warn camera operators when a child was about to cry or misbehave. Psychologists often watched from behind the scenes, ready to step in if needed. It was a high-pressure environment, even for preschoolers. Leo's mischief may have been a small moment, but it showed just how unpredictable Romper Room could be as the years went on. Romper Room became more than a TV show, it became a brand. Every local station that aired it also got rights to sell related toys, books, and products. There were Doobie lunchboxes, plastic romper stompers, and board games inspired by the show's lessons. The toys weren't just props. They were part of the show's income. In the 1970s, toy companies like Hasbro became major sponsors. Hosts were quietly instructed to mention certain products during the episodes. For example, they might say, "Now you may enjoy your juice from your Romper Room cup." It sounded harmless, but it was a way to advertise to children. By the early 1960s, Romper Room wasn't just an American TV show anymore. It had become a worldwide movement. Over 20 countries bought the rights to make their own local versions, each with its own host and classroom of children. There was Romper Room Japan, Romper Room Brazil, Romper Room Australia, and even Romper Room South Africa. In every version, the host greeted the children with the same cheerful smile and taught the same songs about kindness, manners, and sharing. But while the lessons looked identical, the local cultures made each show slightly different. In Japan, the show focused more on group harmony and respect for elders. In Brazil, the episodes included colorful music and dancing. In England, the tone was more formal and polite, reflecting British classroom traditions. This global reach made Romper Room one of the first television formats in history to be franchised. Much like reality shows are today, it proved that children everywhere responded to the same simple formula: warmth, structure, and a friendly teacher who seemed to truly care. For Nancy Claster, this was the realization of her dream, to bring education to every child, no matter where they lived. But it also meant that she had to control her brand carefully. Every international host had to follow the same rules, use the same scripts, and even dress in similar outfits. It was a massive effort to keep the image pure and family-friendly. Yet, in the background, some local producers began to cut corners, skipping safety guidelines or lowering educational standards just to save money. By the 1970s, Nancy began to lose control over the quality of the global versions, and she worried that her show's reputation was slowly slipping away. For millions of viewers, the heart of Romper Room wasn't the lessons or the toys, it was the hosts themselves. Whether it was Miss Nancy, Miss Sally, Miss Fran, or Miss Molly, each one became a trusted figure in children's lives. These women had an unusual role. They weren't just TV presenters. They were teachers to an invisible classroom of children at home. Many fans grew up feeling like their host was a second mother. Viewers sent her birthday cards, drawings, and even gifts. In some cities, the local host couldn't go to a grocery store without being recognized by dozens of little fans. It was heartwarming, but also emotionally heavy. Hosts had to stay cheerful, even when they were sick, tired, or going through personal struggles. Some recalled crying after filming because they felt lonely or overwhelmed. A few said they suffered burnout from constantly being expected to be perfect. There was also pressure to maintain a certain look, neat hair, friendly smile, and soft tone, no matter what. Behind the scenes, producers monitored everything from their tone of voice to their clothing choices. If a host gained weight or cut her hair differently, she might be told to fix it before the next taping. Still, most of them stayed loyal to the show because they truly loved the children. One former host said in an interview, "It was the most exhausting and rewarding job I ever had. You couldn't fake caring for those kids. They could sense it immediately." Even decades later, when these women appeared at fan conventions, they were greeted with tears and hugs. Too many adults, seeing their childhood host again, felt like reconnecting with a long-lost family member. Behind the scenes wasn't always as happy as what appeared on screen. The production schedule was intense. Most versions of Romper Room filmed 5 episodes in a single day. That meant long hours for both children and crew. Because there were no digital tools, everything had to be recorded live or in one take. If a child made a mistake, they simply had to keep going. Studio lights were hot, and air conditioning was rare in early TV studios, especially during summer. Some sets had small hidden fans to keep kids from overheating, but they often didn't help much. The children weren't paid, but they did receive a Romper Room diploma and small gifts like coloring books or toys at the end of their appearance. For many families, that was enough. Parents proudly framed the diploma as proof their child had been on TV, yet psychologists later questioned whether it was healthy to put preschoolers under that kind of pressure. Some former child participants admitted that they cried before filming or felt anxious being watched by strangers. Others, however, said it was the best experience of their childhood. One recalled,